A lion cub is not supposed to stand like a prairie dog. He's not built for it. His legs are wrong. His balance is wrong. His instincts are wrong. And yet, every morning before the sun fully rises, he tries. He stands on two trembling legs beside animals who should fear him, not to hunt, not to scare, but simply to watch the world the way they do. This is the story of a lion cub who believed quietly, stubbornly, that he belonged somewhere he was never meant to be, and how far that belief would take him. Dawn came softly to the high grasslands of New Mexico, laying a pale ribbon of light across the flats before the sun ever showed its face. The air was cool enough to make breath visible, and the ground held the faint, dusty scent of last night's wind. Somewhere far off, a meadowlark tried out its first notes, and the world felt paused, quiet, watchful, as if it were holding its own breath. On a low mound of packed earth near a scatter of sage and rabbit brush, two prairie dogs stood upright like tiny, living signposts. Their bodies were straight, forepaws tucked close to their chests, heads turning in small, precise movements. They weren't posing, they were working. Their eyes scanned the horizon the way their kind had always scanned it, reading the grass for trouble, reading the sky for shadows, reading the wind for anything that didn't belong. And then there was the third figure on the mound. He was too big by every rule the morning knew. He was golden where they were brown. He had thick, soft fur and paws that looked like oversized mittens pressed into the soil. He was a lion cub, young, no mane yet, still rounded in the face in that way that makes dangerous animals look almost harmless when they're small. Almost. Milo's hind legs trembled as he tried to do what the prairie dogs were doing. He rose up as high as he could, stretching his little spine, lifting his chest, attempting to balance on two legs that were built for stalking, pouncing, and sprinting, not standing like a sentry. His front paws hovered in the air, windmilling for control, and his tail swished in frantic little corrections that did more harm than good. For 3 glorious seconds he stayed upright. Then his weight shifted, his back paw slipped on a patch of loose grit, and he wobbled like a child learning to ride a bike. Milo's eyes squeezed shut with fierce concentration, as if the world might steady itself if he refused to see it moving. His mouth tightened and his ears flattened in stubborn determination. He toppled sideways with a soft thump and a puff of dust. The prairie dogs didn't flinch. They didn't bolt for their burrow. They didn't throw themselves into the safety of tunnels like every instinct in their bodies had been designed to do when a predator showed up too close. They simply watched him. Milo scrambled back to his feet, embarrassed in the way only the very young can be. He shook himself hard, sending dust glittering off his fur in the growing light. Then he looked at the two prairie dogs as if waiting for them to judge him. In his mind, simple, earnest, and still new to the world, this wasn't a failure. It was practice. It was a lesson. It was the kind of morning puzzle that made his heart beat faster, because it felt important. He had seen them do this yesterday, and the day before. He had watched, fascinated, from behind a clump of grass, the way they stood tall to see farther than their small bodies should allow. He didn't understand the purpose in the way an adult animal understands it, with survival etched into every motion. What Milo understood was the shape of it, the rhythm. Stand up, look out, be steady, be brave, be useful. Those things mattered to him, though he couldn't have put words to them. He tried again. This time, Milo planted his back paws more carefully, digging his toes into the packed earth. He lifted slowly, feeling his muscles strain. His stomach tightened, his chest rose, his tail extended behind him like a balancing pole, and he focused on one point in the distance, a pale line where the sky met the grass. He thought in his cub way, "If I can do this, I'll be like them." Wyatt, the slightly larger prairie dog, turned his head and made a small, sharp sound. It wasn't the full alarm call that would send the whole colony diving underground. It was something else, shorter, tighter. A warning, maybe, or a question. June, the lighter prairie dog beside him, shifted her weight and blinked slowly, as if deciding what this strange moment meant. Milo heard the sound and froze. He wasn't afraid of them. Not really. But he was afraid of doing the wrong thing. He was afraid of making them leave. That fear surprised him, even if he didn't know how to name it. Lions were not supposed to worry about whether anyone wanted them around. Lions didn't beg to belong, but Milo wasn't thinking about lions. Milo was thinking about these two small creatures who stood like little guardians against the morning, and how they seemed to fit the world in a way he didn't. He tried to make himself smaller, though he couldn't. He lowered his head slightly and sat back on his haunches, the way he'd seen the older cats at the center do when they meant no immediate harm. His paws were still enormous. His teeth were still there, tucked behind a baby face. His eyes were still the eyes of a predator, no matter how gentle his intentions were. June took a step forward. It was a tiny step, cautious and controlled, but to Milo it felt like a door opening. His breath caught. He held still, barely blinking. If he moved too fast, if he pounced the way his body sometimes wanted to pounce without permission, it would all be over. Wyatt's head snapped toward June, another quick sound, stricter this time. Milo watched them, realizing there was a conversation happening right in front of him, one he could almost feel, even if he couldn't understand it. The older part of Wyatt was saying, "This is wrong." The softer part of June was saying, "But look at him." Milo's heart thudded in his chest. A lion cub's heart, learning an unfamiliar lesson. Sometimes the most important hunt is not for food, but for trust. June stopped just short of Milo's reach and lifted her nose to test the air. Milo leaned forward a fraction of an inch, and then stopped himself, as if he were holding an invisible leash. He smelled her, too. Warm earth, dry grass, something sharp and clean like crushed leaves. It was the scent of a world that lived underground and survived by paying attention. June blinked again, and Milo blinked back. Above them, a shadow slid across the ground, broad and silent. Wyatt stiffened so suddenly his whole body went rigid. June's head jerked upward. Milo felt it before he understood it, the prairie dog's fear arriving like a cold gust. In the sky, something circled, patient and hungry, watching the mound the way the mound watched the horizon. Milo lifted his head, following their gaze, and for the first time that morning, he realized that standing guard wasn't a game at all. It was a promise. And now something was coming to test it. Long before Milo ever tried to stand like a prairie dog, before the morning mound and the watching sky, he had already earned a quiet reputation among the humans who cared for him. They called him curious. Sometimes they called him stubborn. On difficult days, when gates were found unlatched and tools dragged into places tools did not belong, they used a softer word that meant trouble. Milo had been brought to the Wildlife Recovery Center when he was barely old enough to open his eyes. A rancher had found him alone, crying in a dry arroyo after a flash storm, with no sign of his mother anywhere nearby. By the time the call reached the center, the night had grown cold, and Milo's small body was already trembling from more than fear. Hannah had been the one to lift him from the crate when he arrived. She remembered how light he felt then, how his heart raced under her hands like it was trying to outrun the world. She remembered thinking, as she always did with the young ones, that survival was a fragile thing, and curiosity could either save it or destroy it. Milo survived. More than that, he thrived. As he grew, it became clear that he was not content with the boundaries set for him. While other young animals learned the comfort of routine, feedings, rest, familiar paths. Milo tested everything. He pushed at fences with his nose. He followed beetles into corners he wasn't meant to reach. He listened to sounds far beyond his enclosure and felt pulled toward them in a way that made his paws itch. In his mind, the world was not divided into safe and unsafe. It was divided into known and unknown, and the unknown called to him. Hannah watched him closely, tracking his movements through the data on her tablet and through instinct older than her training. Milo wasn't reckless. That was what made him hard to predict. He wasn't acting out of fearlessness. He was acting out of belief that the world was meant to be explored, not avoided. That belief was what carried him one early morning through a gap in the perimeter fence that hadn't been there the night before. The Prairie Dog colony lay just beyond the edge of the recovery land, spread across a gentle rise where the soil was perfect for burrows and the grass stayed short. It had been there longer than the center itself, generations stacked invisibly beneath the ground. The prairie dogs knew the rhythms of that place, the way Milo knew the rhythm of his own breathing. Wyatt had been the first to notice the lion cub. He saw movement where movement did not belong, golden, low to the ground, pausing too often, sniffing too much. Wyatt's body stiffened, and the warning sound rose in his throat before he let it out. Not the full alarm. Not yet. June had followed his gaze and felt the jolt of recognition that prey animals carry like a second heartbeat. Predator. Too close. But then she watched. The creature didn't stalk. It didn't crouch the way hunters crouched, with tension coiled tight and ready to spring. It stopped to paw at a rock. It sat down suddenly as if surprised by its own legs. It stared at them with an expression that was not hunger, not calculation, but something softer and strangely intent. Curiosity, June thought, though she had never named it before. Milo crept closer, feeling the familiar thrill of discovery spark through him. These animals were small but bold, standing upright as if they owned the land beneath their feet. They were alert without being frantic, purposeful without being cruel. To Milo, they looked like guardians of a secret he desperately wanted to understand. He made a sound without meaning to, a small, breathy noise that was not a growl and not a call. It came out wrong. He froze afterward, heart pounding, waiting for the inevitable explosion of movement, the vanishing act he had seen so many times before with birds and rabbits. It didn't happen. Wyatt stayed where he was, eyes fixed, body ready. June tilted her head and took in Milo's posture, the way his weight leaned forward not in attack but in imbalance. She saw his paws, too large for precision. She saw his tail flick, correcting him again and again. This was not a hunter. That realization unsettled her more than danger would have. From that morning on, Milo returned. He did not know why he woke before the others at the center. He only knew that when the light changed and the air cooled, something inside him insisted that he go. He slipped out through the same opening, each time expecting it to be gone, and each time relieved when it wasn't. Wyatt and June noticed the pattern. Prairie dogs are built on patterns. They learned the sound of Milo's approach, the uneven rhythm of his steps, the way he always paused before coming fully into view, as if asking permission. They also learned his limits. Milo never lunged, never chased. When startled, he sat. When warned, he stopped. His size made him dangerous by default, but his behavior contradicted the story his body told. And slowly, so slowly that none of them would have recognized the moment it happened, the space between them changed. What none of them noticed was the other set of eyes watching from farther away. Rusty, the ranch dog, had been tracking Milo's movements for days. He didn't understand the cub's interest in the colony, but he understood one thing clearly. Where that lion went, trouble followed. Rusty had seen the prairie dogs scatter before. He knew the sound of their alarms. He knew the smell of fear. And one morning soon, he decided he would not just watch. As the sun climbed higher and Milo settled into his strange, borrowed routine, Rusty lowered his head and began to move. Not toward the center, not toward the humans, but straight toward the mound where the lion cub stood, once again trying and failing to become something he was not. And this time, someone was going to challenge him for that space. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, Milo had already fallen 3 times. Each attempt followed the same hopeful pattern. He would plant his back paws, lift his chest, stretch his neck, and hold his breath as if balance itself might listen. For a moment, sometimes two, he would feel steady. Then his weight would drift, his muscles would argue with one another, and gravity would reclaim him with quiet certainty. Thump. Dust. A huff of frustrated breath. Wyatt watched from the top of the mound, his posture sharp and upright, eyes never stopping their slow sweep of the grass. He did not laugh. He did not retreat. He simply observed, the way he observed everything, as if the world were a problem meant to be solved through attention. June stood lower near the edge of the burrow entrance. She had taken to this spot naturally, where she could see both Milo and the horizon. When Milo fell this time, she flicked her tail once and made a small sound. Not alarm, not approval, but something that landed between the two. Milo pushed himself back up, shaking grit from his fur. His ears flattened, not in fear, but in determination. Somewhere deep in his chest, a thought took shape, vague but insistent. If I stop trying, they'll stop watching. He didn't want that. What he felt around these mornings was unfamiliar. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't the restless itch that usually drove him toward new places. It was something steadier, something that made the hours feel purposeful. When Wyatt stood guard and June moved closer to the ground, Milo sensed order. Roles. A shared understanding of who was doing what and why. He wanted to be part of that understanding. So he tried again. This time he rose more slowly. He spread his toes and focused on his tail, extending it straight behind him. His front paws hovered close to his chest, copying Wyatt's posture as best he could. He locked his eyes on a pale rock in the distance and forced himself not to look down. 3 seconds. 4. Wyatt shifted his weight and glanced sideways just once. Milo felt the flicker of recognition like a spark. He was being seen, not as a problem, not as a threat, but as something worth paying attention to. He held for a 5th second before his legs betrayed him. When he fell, June made a sound that was almost encouraging. The lessons, if they could be called that, had no structure. No one had decided to teach anyone anything. But each morning the same pattern unfolded. Wyatt demonstrated by doing nothing more than being exactly what he was. June adjusted, stepped closer, stepped back, responded to Milo's movements with small cues that he didn't understand but felt. And Milo learned, not quickly, not cleanly, but he learned. He learned how to read the air the way prairie dogs read it, how to notice the way birds went silent, how the grass leaned when something passed through it, how shadows could mean danger long before teeth ever appeared. He learned that standing still could be more powerful than charging forward, that watching could be an action all its own. Sometimes he forgot himself. Once a grasshopper burst from the weeds near June, and Milo's instincts flared. He pounced before he could stop himself, a clumsy, playful leap that sent dirt flying. June vanished underground in a flash, and Wyatt snapped out a sharp alarm that echoed across the colony. Milo froze mid-step, heart slamming. He dropped onto his belly, ears flattened, confused by the sudden emptiness around him. He waited, muscles tight, expecting something worse to happen. Nothing did. Slowly, June reappeared. She emerged cautiously, eyes fixed on Milo, then glanced at Wyatt. Wyatt remained rigid, but the alarm did not escalate. The message was clear even to Milo's simple understanding. That was too much. But this stillness, was acceptable. Milo stayed where he was until June gave a soft sound that released him from his invisible hold. That morning, Hannah noticed the disturbance from a distance. She watched through binoculars, brow furrowed, as Milo lay unusually still near the colony. Her hand hovered near the radio at her belt, ready to intervene. But Milo didn't chase. He didn't pursue. He waited. Hannah lowered the binoculars slowly. Something about the scene unsettled her. Lions did not wait like that. Cubs did not restrain themselves without being forced. She made a note on her tablet and told herself she would review the footage later. For now, she stayed where she was. Back on the mound, the prairie dogs resumed their routine. Wyatt took the high point again. June began to forage nearby, digging with quick, efficient strokes. Milo watched closely, fascinated by the precision. After a moment's hesitation, he approached and tried to copy her movements. The result was chaos. Milo dug with enthusiasm and strength, sending clods of earth flying in every direction. Dust coated his face and filled the air. June jumped back with a sharp sound, and Wyatt chirped in alarm as soil rained down the slope of the mound. Milo stopped instantly, eyes wide. He had gone too far again. But then something unexpected happened. June peered into the crater Milo had created. She leaned forward, sniffed, and disappeared into the hole without hesitation. Wyatt followed a heartbeat later. From below came a flurry of excited sounds, quick and high. Milo leaned over the edge, puzzled. When June re-emerged, her mouth was full. She paused just long enough to look at Milo before darting off to eat. Something warm spread through Milo's chest. Not pride exactly. Something quieter. A sense that even his mistakes might have a place here. As the morning wore on, Milo felt more settled than he ever had. He failed more than he succeeded, but he was trying, and the prairie dogs were still there. What he did not notice was the low, steady shape moving through the grass beyond the colony. Rusty had stopped running. He had dropped into a stalk, his eyes fixed on the mound, his body tense with purpose. And this time he was close enough that everyone was about to notice. Rusty had learned the land the way only a working dog could, by moving through it every day with purpose. He knew where the ground dipped unexpectedly, where the wind shifted without warning, where small creatures liked to scatter, and where larger ones lingered longer than they should. He also knew trouble when he saw it. And to Rusty, the golden shape near the prairie dog colony was trouble. He crouched low as he moved, belly brushing the grass, ears pricked forward. This wasn't play. Rusty didn't play when livestock were involved. And he certainly didn't play when a predator wandered too close to territory he had been raised to protect. The lion cub's movements confused him. The stopping, the sitting, the falling over. None of it fit the pattern Rusty trusted. Unpredictable was worse than dangerous. Wyatt sensed him first. The prairie dog's head snapped around, body stiffening so suddenly that June froze mid-dig. Wyatt's warning call cut through the morning air. Short, sharp, urgent. It wasn't meant just for June. It was meant for the entire colony. Burrow entrances erupted with motion. Milo felt the shift instantly. The calm he had grown used to vanished, replaced by tension that buzzed through the ground beneath his paws. He turned, ears swiveling, eyes scanning, until they landed on Rusty's low, advancing shape. Something in Milo's chest tightened. This was different. Rusty didn't smell like the coyotes that passed through at night, nor like the humans Milo knew so well. He smelled of work and discipline and a kind of focused intensity Milo had never encountered before. Rusty's eyes were locked on him, not curious, not amused. Milo stood up, too fast. The movement triggered Rusty's response. He burst forward in a sudden sprint, barking sharply, his voice loud and commanding. The sound hit Milo like a wall. Instinct surged, hot and immediate. Milo's muscles bunched, ready to run, to pounce, to do something decisive. Instead, he hesitated. In the split second before he acted, Milo remembered June vanishing into the ground. He remembered Wyatt's stiff, unwavering posture. He remembered the way stillness had meant safety. So he sat. It was the wrong move by every instinct Rusty trusted. Rusty skidded to a halt, startled despite himself. He circled Milo, barking again, testing. Milo stayed seated, ears flat, tail wrapped awkwardly around his feet. His heart hammered so loudly he felt sure Rusty could hear it. Wyatt had disappeared underground, but June lingered just below the surface, peeking out from a burrow entrance. Her eyes darted between Milo and Rusty, her body taut with alarm. Milo glanced at her once, then looked back at Rusty. He lowered his head slightly, not in submission, but in restraint. He didn't want to chase. He didn't want to scare anyone. He wanted this moment to pass without breaking something he didn't know how to fix. Rusty didn't understand any of that. He barked again, closer now, snapping at the air near Milo's shoulder. Milo flinched but held his ground. Dust rose around them, carrying the scent of fear and confusion. From the ridge beyond the colony, Hannah saw the scene unfold and swore under her breath. She broke into a run. "Rusty!" she shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. The dog hesitated, ears flicking toward the sound he knew well. Milo seized the moment to do something that surprised even himself. He stood, not tall, not proud, but steady. He turned slightly, angling his body away from Rusty and toward Hannah's voice. Rusty backed off a step, torn between instinct and training. Hannah reached them seconds later, breathless, heart racing. She placed herself between Milo and the dog, one hand raised, the other gripping Rusty's collar. "That's enough," she said firmly. Rusty let out a final frustrated bark, but allowed himself to be pulled back. His eyes never left Milo. Milo stayed still until Hannah rested a hand on his shoulder. Only then did his legs begin to tremble. The prairie dog colony slowly emerged again, though not fully. Wyatt resurfaced near the mound, posture rigid, eyes fixed on the humans now. June stayed closer to her burrow, watching Milo with something like concern. Hannah exhaled slowly and looked down at Milo. He wasn't injured. He wasn't aggressive. He was shaken. That worried her more than a bite or a chase would have. She guided Milo back toward the center, keeping Rusty well away. Milo went willingly, though every step felt heavier than the last. Over his shoulder, he glanced back at the mound. Wyatt stood where he always stood. June had climbed partway out of her burrow, her head tilted in that thoughtful way Milo had come to recognize. Milo stopped walking. Hannah followed his gaze and frowned. She had known, of course. She wasn't blind. But seeing it laid bare, the connection, the pattern, the trust, made the situation suddenly feel fragile. "This can't keep happening," she murmured, more to herself than to Milo. Back at the enclosure, Milo paced restlessly. The fence felt smaller than it had before. The sounds of the prairie dog colony carried faintly on the wind, and every one of them tugged at something inside him. Hannah made notes that evening, long ones. She flagged Milo's file and added a reminder to review protocols. The rancher had already complained once about animals wandering too close. Another incident like this, and there would be pressure, from outside, from above. Milo curled up to sleep that night, but his dreams were restless. He dreamed of standing tall and steady, of warning calls he couldn't quite make, of a mound just beyond his reach. And somewhere in the dark, Rusty lay awake too, listening. Tomorrow, he decided, he wouldn't wait for the human to intervene. Tomorrow he would make sure the lion cub understood where he did not belong. The change came quietly, the way the most dangerous shifts often do. It began with the wind. For days it had blown warmer than it should have, carrying the dry, brittle smell of grass, baked too long under an unrelenting sun. The mornings no longer felt cool and forgiving. Even before dawn, the air pressed close to the ground, heavy with the promise of heat. Milo felt it in his lungs when he breathed and in his paws when he stepped onto the earth. Something was different. He didn't know what, only that the world felt tighter, less patient. That morning, Milo woke before the others and lay still for a long moment, listening. The center was quiet, but beyond it, the open land, the place where the prairie dogs lived, there was a restless energy that tugged at him. He slipped out as he had so many times before, though Hannah's words from the day before lingered in his mind. This can't keep happening. He didn't understand why. He only knew that he needed to go. Wyatt and June were already out when Milo arrived, but they weren't where they usually stood. They were lower, closer to the ground, their movements quick and purposeful. Wyatt climbed onto the mound but didn't settle into his relaxed sentinel stance. His body was tight, head swiveling faster than usual. June paused often in her digging, lifting her nose to test the air. Milo felt the tension immediately. It slipped into him like a cold thread. He approached more carefully than he ever had, each step measured. He wanted to show them he could be calm, that he could listen. He sat near the base of the mound and waited, watching Wyatt the way a student watches a teacher when the lesson suddenly becomes harder. Wyatt made a low sound, different from the sharp alarms Milo had learned to respect. This one was steady, warning without panic. Milo felt it settle into his bones. He followed Wyatt's gaze and looked outward, scanning the grass. At first he saw nothing. Then the grass moved. Not the random shiver of wind, but a deliberate parting, slow and controlled. Milo's muscles tensed, every instinct waking at once. His heart began to race, and with it came the old urge to run forward, to confront, to make himself known. He stopped himself. He remembered stillness. From the rise beyond the colony, 3 shapes emerged, low and gray against the earth. Coyotes. Young ones, lean and sharp-eyed, moving with the quiet confidence of animals who had learned hunger well. They spread slightly as they advanced, not rushing, not yet attacking, testing, reading. Milo's breath caught. He had seen coyotes before, always at a distance, always with humans nearby. This was different. This was close. And Wyatt and June were out in the open. June hadn't seen them yet. Milo's mind raced in a way it never had before. He thought of Hannah. He thought of the fence. He thought of Rusty's barking and the way the prairie dogs vanished when danger truly came. He knew, suddenly and clearly, what the right thing was supposed to be. He was supposed to leave. Go back. Get help. Let someone bigger, older, stronger handle this. But his feet didn't move. June looked up then, just as one of the coyotes took another step forward. Her body went rigid, eyes wide. Wyatt's warning exploded into the air, sharp and urgent now, and the colony reacted instantly. Burrow entrances swallowed bodies in a flurry of motion and dust. June ran, but she stumbled. Her small body caught on the edge of a hole, just long enough to matter. Milo didn't think. He rose up, not into a clumsy imitation of a sentinel stance, but into his full height, every inch of his young body stretched tall. He let out a sound that tore from his chest, raw and uneven, a roar that wasn't practiced, wasn't powerful by adult standards, but was filled with everything he felt. Fear, urgency, determination. The coyotes froze. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then June disappeared underground, safe at last. Wyatt vanished a second later. but not before turning his head back toward Milo, eyes locked on him in something that looked almost like disbelief. The coyotes regrouped quickly. They weren't afraid enough to leave, not yet. They shifted their focus, reassessing. Milo saw it happen, and understood, with a clarity that made his stomach drop. Now they were looking at him. He backed up slowly, remembering fragments of instinct that lived deeper than thought. Don't turn your back. Don't show weakness. Make yourself look bigger. He spread his stance, planted his paws, and forced himself not to retreat, even as his legs shook. The coyotes began to fan out. Milo felt very small. He tried to roar again. The sound came out stronger this time, but it didn't stop them. One coyote darted forward in a feint, testing his reaction. Milo swiped instinctively, claws flashing, missing by inches. The movement cost him balance, and he stumbled just slightly. That was all the opening they needed. They moved closer, faster now. Milo's thoughts fractured. He wondered, briefly and painfully, if this was what Hannah had been afraid of all along. If his curiosity had finally led him somewhere he could not follow himself back from. Then, over the pounding of his heart and the soft thud of approaching paws, he heard something else. A sound that didn't belong to the coyotes. A sharp, urgent call, human-made, amplified, and very close. The coyotes hesitated, heads snapping up. Milo turned toward the sound, hope and fear colliding inside him, because whatever was coming now would decide whether this morning ended as another lesson, or as the moment everything went too far. The sound came again, sharp, metallic, cutting through the tension like a blade. The coyotes flinched first. It wasn't a roar or a bark or anything the land had taught them to understand. It was artificial, jarring, and close enough to matter. Milo didn't know what it was either, but the moment it echoed across the grass, something inside him loosened just a fraction. Not relief. Not yet. But possibility. One of the coyotes stepped back, head high, ears swiveling. Another growled low, uncertain. The third kept its eyes on Milo, assessing him with the cold focus of an animal that knew fear but hadn't learned to obey it. Milo's legs trembled so badly he worried they might give out. His chest burned from the effort of breathing. He could taste dust and adrenaline, sharp and bitter on his tongue. Every instinct screamed at him to turn and run, to sprint back toward the fence, toward the humans, toward safety. He did not. Somewhere behind him, underground, Wyatt and June waited. Milo couldn't see them, but he felt their presence the way he felt the ground beneath his paws. They had trusted him without meaning to. They had stayed just long enough to believe he would do something. He lifted his head again. The second sound came from closer now, followed by a human voice, raised and urgent. "Hey, get out of there!" The coyotes hesitated longer this time. Milo seized the moment, though he didn't recognize it as strategy. He only knew that if he stopped now, if he shrank back into the cub he had been, everything that had brought him here would collapse into meaninglessness. He spread his stance wider and forced his body still, locking his joints the way he had watched Wyatt lock his. Stand, look, hold. The smallest coyote darted forward, quick and sharp, snapping at the air inches from Milo's paw. Milo reacted on instinct, swiping hard. His claws connected this time, grazing fur. The coyote yelped and leapt back. The others broke formation. That was when Rusty arrived. The ranch dog burst from the grass like a streak of muscle and purpose, barking loud and deep, no hesitation in him at all. He charged straight at the coyotes, teeth bared, fury clean and unmistakable. To Rusty, this wasn't confusion or curiosity or moral struggle. This was his job. The coyotes scattered, retreating in 3 different directions, using the uneven ground to put space between themselves and the sudden chaos. Rusty chased one a short distance, barking until it vanished over a rise, then turned back, chest heaving, eyes blazing. Milo stood frozen, stunned by how fast the world had changed. Hannah reached them seconds later, breathless, one hand gripping a handheld deterrent device, the other already reaching for Milo. She dropped to her knees beside him, scanning for injuries, her fingers shaking just enough to betray the fear she kept buried under training. "You're okay," she said, though it sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. "You're okay." Milo leaned into her touch, legs finally giving way beneath him. He didn't collapse fully. He caught himself, lowering down carefully, the way he'd learned to lower himself around the prairie dogs. Hannah noticed that too. Her jaw tightened. Rusty paced in a tight circle nearby, still keyed up, still ready. He glanced once at Milo, then looked away, as if unsure what to do with a creature who had just stood his ground instead of bolting. Slowly, the prairie dog colony reemerged. First came heads, then shoulders, then bodies. Wyatt surfaced near the mound, posture rigid, but eyes bright with something that wasn't fear. June appeared closer to Milo than she ever had before, her small frame tense, her gaze fixed on him as if checking to make sure he was real. Milo met her eyes. He didn't know how to explain what had happened inside him when he chose not to run. He didn't have words for the moment his fear that had been outweighed by something heavier and steadier. But June seemed to understand anyway. She made a soft sound, low, almost thoughtful, and then turned back toward the mound, resuming her place as if to say, "The danger has passed." For now. Hannah stood slowly, pulling Milo up with her. She looked from the colony to the open land, and then down at the cub at her side. Her heart pounded with a realization she didn't want to admit. This wasn't a game anymore. Milo hadn't just wandered too close. He had chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. He had placed himself between danger and something smaller than himself without any guarantee that help would arrive in time. That was not behavior she could ignore. She led Milo back toward the center, one hand firm on his shoulder. Rusty followed at a distance, quieter now, his role fulfilled for the moment. Milo glanced back only once, searching the mound. Wyatt stood tall, unmoving. June had climbed up beside him. Two small figures watching. Back at the enclosure, Hannah secured the gate and leaned against it, her eyes closed briefly as she exhaled. She knew what came next. Meetings, reports, decisions made by people who hadn't seen what she had seen. Milo lay down in the shade, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. His body ached, but his mind stayed sharp, replaying the moment he had stood his ground again and again. He had wanted to protect. That frightened Hannah more than the coyotes ever could. That night, she filed an incident report that was longer than any she had written before. She flagged Milo's case and added a single line at the end, one that would change everything. Immediate reassessment recommended. Milo slept, unaware that the choice he had made that morning had started a countdown neither of them could stop. And somewhere beyond the fence, the prairie dog stood guard longer than usual, as if waiting for something else to come. The days that followed felt heavier, as if the land itself had decided to press down. Milo noticed it first in the way the mornings changed. The light still came, the birds still called, but the space between waking and being watched grew smaller. Hannah was always there now, not hovering exactly, but close enough that Milo could feel the quiet boundary of her attention. The fence that had once seemed like a suggestion became a certainty. He tried at first to follow his old routine. On the second morning after the coyotes, Milo rose early and padded toward the familiar gap in the perimeter. He slowed when he saw Hannah standing there, arms crossed, her silhouette dark against the pale sky. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Milo stopped. Something inside him resisted, a restless pull toward the mound, and the quiet figures that should have been there. He sat down instead, tail curling around his paws, and stared out across the grass. The prairie dog colony was just visible in the distance, small humps and shadows against the earth. He waited. Nothing happened. Wyatt and June waited too. They stood longer than usual that morning, bodies upright, heads turning again and again toward the place where Milo always appeared. When he didn't come, June dropped down and surfaced again, as if she might have missed him the first time. Wyatt held his post, but his stillness had a different quality now, less alert, more searching. The next morning was the same, and the one after that. Milo grew quiet, not withdrawn exactly, but thoughtful in a way Hannah hadn't seen before. He paced less. He played less. He spent long stretches lying in the shade, eyes half-lidded, watching the open land beyond the fence. When he practiced stalking exercises with her, he did them carefully, correctly, but without joy. Hannah felt the change like a weight in her chest. She had read the assessment reports. She had listened to the conference calls and the calm, reasonable voices explaining risk and liability and best practices. The words made sense. They always did. Milo was growing. He was strong. He was learning quickly, too quickly, in ways that didn't fit neatly into the recovery program's goals. His interactions with the prairie dogs had crossed a line from curiosity into attachment, and attachment could get him killed. Or worse, relocation was the solution. A larger facility, more space, fewer temptations. A place where Milo could learn what it meant to be a lion without confusing himself or anyone else. The decision was made. Hannah delayed it as long as she could. She watched Milo one evening as the sun dipped low and the grass turned copper and gold. He stood at the far end of his enclosure, body angled toward the colony, ears flicking at sounds only he seemed to hear. There was no frustration in him now, only a quiet, patient sadness that settled into her bones and stayed. That night, Hannah didn't sleep. By morning, she knew what she was going to do. She woke Milo before dawn, gently, resting a hand on his shoulder until his eyes opened. He blinked up at her, alert at once, as if some part of him already sensed that this morning was different. They walked together through the cool darkness, farther than they had gone in days. Hannah moved carefully, checking the wind, the ground, the distant shapes of the land. When they reached the edge of the prairie dog territory, she stopped. "This is as far as I go," she murmured. Milo looked up at her, then back at the open ground ahead. His heart began to beat faster, not with excitement, but with recognition. He stepped forward alone. Wyatt and June were already out. They stood on the mound as they always had, silhouettes against the soft gray of early light. When they saw Milo, they froze. For a moment, none of them moved. Then June made a sound, quiet, questioning. Wyatt followed with one, just as soft. Milo approached slowly, deliberately. He didn't bounce. He didn't rush. His tail didn't wag. Every step felt heavy with meaning he couldn't fully grasp, but he felt it all the same. He stopped at the base of the mound and simply looked at them. He wanted to remember everything. The shape of Wyatt's stance, the way June tilted her head, the smell of earth and dry grass that had come to mean morning itself. He wanted to press this moment into himself so it would not fade. For a long while they stood there together in silence. Then Milo did something he had never managed before. He rose up onto his hind legs, slowly, steadily. He spread his toes, aligned his weight, and lifted his chest until his body found balance instead of fighting it. His tail extended behind him, not flailing, not correcting, but calm. He stood. Wyatt turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. June watched without blinking. Seconds passed, then more. Milo held the position, muscles burning, breath controlled. He felt tall, not just in body, but in purpose. This was what he had been trying to understand all along. Not how to stand, but why. He was standing with them. At last he lowered himself back down. A sound escaped him, low and uncertain, caught between the strange calls he had tried to imitate and something deeper, heavier. June answered softly. Wyatt followed. They didn't need more than that. From the edge of the territory, Hannah watched, her throat tight. She checked her watch, knowing she had already taken more time than she should have. When she called Milo's name, it was gentle, but final. Milo turned away. He walked back toward her without looking over his shoulder. Behind him, Wyatt and June stayed on the mound, standing guard as the light grew stronger, waiting for a shape that would not return. And as Hannah and Milo disappeared into the rising day, none of them knew that this was not the end of the story, only the last moment before it changed forever. Years passed the way they always do on open land, quietly, without ceremony. The Prairie Dog colony endured drought and rain, births and losses, the steady rotation of seasons written into the soil beneath their feet. Wyatt grew broader through the chest, his movements slower but more deliberate. June became one of the colony's most reliable sentinels. Trusted not because she was fearless, but because she noticed things early. They taught the young ones the same lessons they had learned themselves: how to stand, how to listen, how to read the air before danger ever showed its face. They did not tell stories. Prairie dogs do not dwell on the past. But sometimes, when a distant sound rolled across the grass or a shadow lingered longer than it should have, they held their positions just a little longer than necessary, as if waiting for something they could not name. Milo's life changed completely. The relocation was gentle but final. The new facility sat farther south, where the land stretched wider and the fences were fewer. There were other lions there, young ones like him and older ones who carried themselves with quiet authority. Milo learned to move among them, learned the language of his own kind, learned what strength looked like when it was no longer clumsy. He grew. His shoulders broadened, his steps grew sure. The softness of cubhood fell away, replaced by muscle and intent. He learned to hunt properly, to stalk without hesitation, to claim space without apology. The handlers noted his progress with approval. He was attentive, focused, reliable. He became, by every measurable standard, what a lion should be. And yet, sometimes when the air changed just before dawn, Milo would find himself restless. He would walk to the highest point in his enclosure, a flat rock warmed by the previous day's sun, and stand there longer than the others. He did not pace. He did not roar. He watched. Without realizing it, he shifted his weight in a familiar way. He lifted his chest slightly higher than necessary. He rose just enough on his hind legs to see farther, to feel the world open in front of him instead of pressing close. The other lions noticed the habit, though none of them questioned it. Animals rarely question what works. To Milo, it never felt strange. It felt right. He did not think of Wyatt and June in any conscious way. The memory of them lived deeper than thought, woven into muscle and instinct. What he carried forward from those mornings was not an image or a feeling he could name, but a pattern, a way of being alert without fear, present without aggression. He had learned long ago that standing still could be a form of courage. One late summer evening, years after his relocation, Milo stood alone on his rock as the light faded from gold to gray. The land beyond his enclosure stretched quiet and vast. A breeze moved through the grass, carrying scents of dust and distant rain. He rose slightly, balanced easily, and scanned the horizon. For a moment, just a moment, the world felt exactly as it had in those early mornings long ago. Not smaller, not safer, just understandable. Then he lowered himself and walked away, leaving no sign that anything unusual had occurred. Far to the north, the prairie dog colony prepared for night. The young ones tumbled near the burrows, chasing one another in tight circles until Wyatt made a sound that sent them underground. June took the mound, her posture steady, her gaze sweeping the land in practiced arcs. A distant shape moved along the horizon, large, indistinct, far enough away to pose no immediate threat. June watched it longer than necessary, then turned her head slightly, as if committing the moment to instinct. When the shape vanished, she remained standing. The land did not remember the friendship. The grass did not mark the morning spent together. The wind did not carry stories from one place to another. But something had changed all the same. A lion stood a little differently on his watch rock. 2 prairie dogs waited a little longer before dropping back underground. And somewhere in the quiet space between what was and what is, the lesson endured. That sometimes the most important teachers are the ones who never set out to teach, and the most meaningful bonds are the ones that last only long enough to shape who we become. The world moved on, as it always does. But every now and then, at first light, 3 different lives still seem to share the same horizon, connected not by memory, but by the way they watched it. If this story stayed with you, if the image of that lion cub standing beside the prairie dog still lingers in your mind, take a moment and leave a comment below. You don't need many words. Just type, "I stayed," if you listened until the end, or "I felt it," if this story touched something quiet inside you. Your comment helps this story reach others who might need it tonight. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories told slowly, gently, about unlikely bonds, quiet courage, and moments that change us, you're welcome to subscribe and stay with us. There are many more stories waiting.